Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're here to drift off peacefully, to let your mind wander through quiet gardens, or simply to find a gentle escape from the day, you've found the perfect spot. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey that began over 3 billion years ago, when the first tiny green specks learned something extraordinary: how to eat sunlight. From those humble beginnings in ancient oceans to the roses blooming outside your window, this is the story of the greatest takeover in Earth's history. Not through conquest or violence, but through patience, partnership, and the simple magic of turning starlight into life itself. Before we begin our gentle drift through deep time, if you enjoy these sleepy explorations of science, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. It helps keep this cozy corner of curiosity growing, much like the plants we'll meet tonight. And I'd love to know in the comments where you're listening from. Are you surrounded by a garden, nestled in a concrete jungle, or perhaps lying beneath the stars? Fair warning, I hope this isn't so fascinating that it keeps you wide awake. But if it does, at least you'll drift off knowing how every breath you take connects you to billions of years of botanical ingenuity. So settle in, take a deep breath of that plant-made oxygen, and let's discover how the green world quietly conquered everything. Take a moment to settle in a little deeper. Maybe adjust your pillow. Let your shoulders relax. We're about to travel back in time together, back to when our planet was learning its most important lesson: how to breathe. Picture this with me. It's 3.8 billion years ago, and Earth looks nothing like the world outside your window tonight. No forests whispering in the wind, no grass beneath your feet, no flowers turning their faces toward the Sunday. The land is naked rock and volcanic fury, painted in shades of rust and ash. The oceans stretch endlessly, dark and mysterious, holding secrets that would change everything. And in those ancient waters, something extraordinary was beginning to stir. Imagine tiny green specks, smaller than the period at the end of this sentence, learning to eat sunlight. These were our planet's first magicians, cyanobacteria, though they had no idea they were about to perform the greatest trick in Earth's history. They floated in the primordial seas like microscopic emeralds, each one no bigger than a whisper, yet collectively powerful enough to transform an entire world. What made these little beings so special? They had discovered something that seems almost impossible when you really think about it: how to capture light from a star 93 million miles away and turn it into food. Photosynthesis. The word itself sounds like poetry, doesn't it? Photo meaning light, and synthesis meaning to put together. They were putting together starlight and water, carbon and hope, creating the very foundation of life as we know it. But here's the beautiful irony of our story. These ancient bacteria didn't set out to save the world. They were simply trying to survive, one sunny day at a time. They absorbed carbon dioxide from the water around them, soaked up the golden rays filtering down from above, and as a byproduct, almost as an afterthought, they released something into the ocean that had never existed in significant quantities before: oxygen. Now, if you could have asked those early Earth scientists, if they had existed, they might have been horrified. Oxygen was toxic to most life forms back then. It was a poison, a dangerous waste product that these tiny green rebels were pumping into the atmosphere with reckless abandon. But sometimes the most beautiful revolutions begin with what seems like destruction. For nearly 1 billion years, these microscopic architects worked in quiet anonymity, their numbers growing, their influence spreading like ripples across the ancient seas. They formed vast mats and colonies, creating some of Earth's first communities. Stromatolites, we call the rocky evidence they left behind. Layered limestone formations that look like cabbage heads made of stone. You can still see them today, in places like Shark Bay in Australia, living fossils that connect us directly to this ancient underwater world. And slowly, gradually, something unprecedented began to happen. The Great Oxygenation Event, though event makes it sound sudden, when really it unfolded over hundreds of millions of years, which gives you a sense of just how patient our planet can be when it's working on something important. The oxygen these tiny beings produced began to accumulate. At first, it was absorbed by iron in the oceans, creating the banded iron formations that geologists read like pages in Earth's diary. But eventually, inevitably, there was too much oxygen for the ocean to hold. It began to escape into the atmosphere, and everything changed. This was catastrophe for many of the existing life forms. The Great Oxygenation Event was also the world's first mass extinction, as countless species that couldn't handle this new, oxygen-rich world simply vanished. But from catastrophe came possibility. The survivors learned to not just tolerate oxygen, but to use it. They discovered that oxygen was like rocket fuel for life. It allowed for more complex metabolism, more energy, more possibilities than ever before. The sky itself began to change color. Before this great transformation, Earth's atmosphere would have appeared a hazy orange or pink to our eyes. But as oxygen accumulated and combined with ultraviolet light from the sun, something magical happened. The ozone layer formed. This invisible shield high above the planet's surface began protecting the world below from harmful radiation, making it safer for life to eventually venture onto land. So there we were, 2.5 billion years ago, with our planet slowly learning to breathe. The tiny green specks had done something that seemed impossible. They had taken a world that was hostile to complex life and made it into a nursery where incredible things could grow. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is that it's still happening. Right now, as you listen to these words, there are cyanobacteria in oceans around the world continuing this ancient work. Every breath you take contains oxygen that might have been released by one of these microscopic gardeners just moments ago. You are breathing the exhalation of creatures so small you need a microscope to see them, yet so mighty they literally created the air that fills your lungs. Take a breath now. Feel it. Fill your chest. Nourish your blood. Power your thoughts. That breath is a gift from the deep past, a love letter written in molecular poetry by the first green beings to call our planet home. Now, let's drift forward in our time machine, past hundreds of millions of years of underwater preparation, to about 500 million years ago. Picture Earth's continents then. They would look strange and alien to us, clustered together in different arrangements, but the coastlines. Ah, the coastlines were where the real drama was beginning to unfold. Imagine standing on one of those ancient shores, though you'd need a time-traveling spacesuit, because the air was still very different then. The landscape before you would be utterly barren. No trees, no grass, no flowers, just rock and sand and the eternal conversation between land and sea. It would look like an alien planet, beautiful in its starkness but eerily quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects hidden in undergrowth, no soft carpet of moss beneath your feet. But if you looked closely at the water's edge, you might notice something extraordinary beginning to happen. The first green immigrants were arriving. From water to land, it sounds simple when we say it quickly, doesn't it? But this was perhaps the most audacious journey in the history of life on Earth. Think about it. For over 3 billion years, life had been aquatic. Water was life's cradle, its protector, its provider. Water carried nutrients directly to every cell, supported body weight, protected against temperature extremes, and provided a stable environment where chemical reactions could happen reliably. And now, some brave green souls were venturing out of this liquid paradise onto the harsh, dry, unforgiving land. These pioneers weren't the plants you see around you today. They were much simpler beings, moss and liverworts, tiny green carpets that crept cautiously along the water's edge, like timid explorers testing unknown territory. They were small, humble, staying close to the ground, never venturing far from moisture. But they were revolutionaries nonetheless. Picture them as cosmic refugees, seeking new homes beyond the crowded waters where competition for sunlight and space was becoming fierce. The underwater world was getting busy after billions of years of evolution, and these enterprising little plants had noticed something the others had missed. There was a whole world of untapped sunlight just beyond the water's surface, streaming down from the sky with no one to claim it. But how did they solve the puzzle of living without being surrounded by water? This is where the story becomes almost magical in its ingenuity. First, they had to learn to hold on to water when they found it, because the land was a thirsty place that would steal moisture right out of living tissue. So they developed waxy coatings, like tiny raincoats, to keep their precious water from evaporating away. If you've ever noticed how water beads up on a leaf after rain, you're seeing this ancient innovation still at work. They also had to figure out how to reproduce without water to carry their offspring. In the sea, plants could simply release their reproductive cells and trust the currents to bring them together. But on land, the early plants developed spores, hardy little packages that could survive the dry journey through air, waiting patiently for the right conditions to begin a new life. It was like learning to send messages in bottles across a desert of air. And then there was the challenge of getting nutrients. In water, dissolved minerals and nutrients flow freely around plant cells. But in soil, plants had to become miners, developing the very first roots to dig down into the earth and extract what they needed. These early root systems were simple, more like tiny anchors with fuzzy tendrils, but they were the beginning of something that would eventually reshape the planet itself. The liverworts were particularly clever. Their name comes from their liver-shaped lobes, and medieval people thought they could cure liver ailments because of this resemblance. While that wasn't quite right, these little plants were indeed healers of a sort. They began the slow work of healing the barren land, creating the first patches of green in a brown world. As these pioneer plants established their beachheads on the margins of continents, they began to change the very ground beneath them. Their tiny roots, working away in the soil, started breaking down rock into smaller particles. When they died, their remains mixed with this weathered rock, creating the first true soils. They were building the foundation for all the plants that would come after them. And slowly, carefully, they began to venture further inland, following river valleys where moisture lingered, creeping up rock faces where morning dew collected, spreading across the landscape like a gentle green tide. They were writing the first chapter of terrestrial life, painting the first brushstrokes of green on Earth's brown canvas. But being the first to try something new, that takes a special kind of courage, doesn't it? These early land plants were pioneers in the truest sense, venturing into an unknown world with no guidebook, no map, no guarantee of success. They faced challenges that no living thing had ever faced before: drying winds, temperature extremes, the constant threat of dehydration, predators they had never evolved to handle. Many experiments failed. Many lineages of early land plants tried different strategies and didn't make it. The fossil record is full of these brave attempts. Plants with unusual structures and strange adaptations that seemed promising at the time, but ultimately didn't work out. They were the first drafts in evolution's long manuscript, necessary steps towards something greater. But the survivors learned lessons that their descendants still carry today. They learned patience, persistence, and the art of making the most of limited resources. They learned to work together, sharing nutrients and support through their interconnected tissues. They learned that sometimes the gentlest approach, growing low, staying humble, spreading slowly but surely, could conquer worlds. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of those ancient shorelines where the first green immigrants were taking their tentative steps onto dry land. In many ways, they were doing what all life does, reaching toward light, seeking new possibilities, refusing to be limited by the boundaries of their birth. And tomorrow, when you see moss growing on a tree trunk or sidewalk, remember that you're looking at the descendants of Earth's first terrestrial pioneers. They may seem small and insignificant compared to the towering trees around them, but they carry in their humble cells the memory of that great journey from water to land, the courage of the first green beings who dared to imagine life beyond the sea. Their quiet revolution was just beginning, and the world would never be the same. Let's pause for a moment and imagine ourselves back in that ancient world about 400 million years ago. The brave little moss pioneers we met in our last chapter have been working quietly for tens of millions of years, spreading their green carpets across the margins of continents. But something new is stirring in the plant kingdom, a restlessness, an ambition that's about to change everything. Picture yourself walking across one of those early landscapes. Your feet would sink slightly into the spongy moss, and you'd notice something remarkable happening at the edges of these green patches. Some plants are beginning to stand up straighter, reaching higher, as if they're trying to get a better view of the world around them. These are the early vascular plants, and they're about to stage one of evolution's most spectacular growth spurts. The invention of roots was like learning to plant your feet firmly in the ground of your convictions. But these weren't the delicate thread-like anchors of their moss cousins. These were serious roots, thick, strong, branching networks that dove deep into the earth with purpose and determination. Imagine them as Earth's first miners. But instead of seeking gold or precious stones, they were after something far more valuable: water and the mineral treasures dissolved within it. These early root systems were architectural marvels in their own right. They spread out like underground cities, creating networks that could extend far beyond the visible plant above ground. Some of these ancient plants developed roots that reached down 6 feet or more. Imagine that. A plant no taller than your waist, sending roots down deeper than you are tall, like a child reaching down into the earth with arms stretched impossibly long. But roots were just the beginning of this engineering revolution. The real breakthrough came when plants discovered how to build highways for water and nutrients, their vascular systems. Think of it this way. The early moss, like plants, were like small villages where everyone had to carry their own water from the well. But these new vascular plants? They were building the first subway systems, the first interstate highways of the biological world. Xylem and phloem, even the words sound like ancient magic, don't they? Xylem, the tissue that carries water and minerals upward from the roots, like a vertical river flowing against gravity. And phloem, the tissue that carries the sweet sugars made by photosynthesis down from the leaves to feed the rest of the plant, like a delivery service bringing food to every neighborhood in a growing city. But here's where the story gets truly extraordinary. To build these internal transportation networks, plants had to solve one of engineering's greatest challenges: how to create tubes that were both strong enough to support tall structures and efficient enough to move fluids over long distances. Their solution was a substance called lignin. Lignin, it's not a word that trips easily off the tongue, but it might be one of the most important molecules in the history of life on Earth. Think of lignin as nature's first plastic, a complex polymer that plants learned to weave through their cell walls like rebar through concrete. It made their tissues rigid and strong, waterproof and durable. Most importantly, it allowed them to grow tall without collapsing under their own weight. This was the moment when plants truly began to reach for the sky. No longer content to hug the ground like their moss ancestors, they stretched upward with increasing confidence. First to the height of your ankle, then your knee, then your waist. Some of the early trees of the Devonian period reached heights that would have towered over your head. 30, 40, even 50 feet tall. They were writing their names across the horizon in letters of green. And then came the Carboniferous period, what we might call Earth's great green explosion, roughly 350 million years ago. Close your eyes and try to imagine this world with me. The climate was warm and humid, like a planetary greenhouse. Sea levels were high, creating vast, swampy lowlands that stretched across continents. And in these perfect conditions, plants went absolutely wild. Imagine forests unlike anything you've ever seen. Giant ferns unfurled fronds as big as umbrellas, some reaching heights of 30 feet or more. These weren't delicate woodland ferns like you might find in your garden. These were titans, ferns with ambitions, ferns that had forgotten they were supposed to stay small and humble. Alongside them grew the scale trees. Lepidodendron, with their distinctive diamond-patterned bark, reaching heights of over 100 feet. Picture a pine tree, but instead of needles, its trunk is covered in a geometric pattern that looks like it was carved by ancient mathematicians. But perhaps most spectacular of all were the giant horsetails, calamites. Today's horsetails are modest little plants you might overlook in a meadow, but their Carboniferous ancestors were forest giants, growing to heights of 60 feet or more, with jointed stems as thick as tree trunks and whorls of leaves that spread like green fireworks at each joint. Let's pause here for a poetic interlude, shall we? Close your eyes and listen with me to the sound of those ancient forests. There would have been no bird songs yet. Birds were still tens of millions of years in the future. No rustling of mammalian feet through undergrowth. Mammals too were yet to come. Instead, imagine the whisper of prehistoric wind through giant ferns, the creaking of massive tree ferns swaying in humid breezes, the gentle splash of water in vast swamps where these green giants stood with their feet in primordial puddles. The air would have been thick and rich, heavy with moisture and oxygen. So much oxygen that the atmosphere contained nearly twice as much as it does today. This oxygen-rich world allowed arthropods to grow to incredible sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as hawks patrolled these ancient skies. Millipedes as long as your arm crawled through the fern undergrowth. It was a world where everything seemed to be experimenting with just how big life could become. But what strikes me most about these Carboniferous forests is their patience. These were not the quick-growing plants of today's world. Many of these tree ferns and scale trees grew slowly, adding layer upon layer of woody tissue year after year, building their towering structures with the methodical care of cathedral builders. They were investing in the future, creating forests that would stand for thousands of years. And when they finally fell, brought down by storms or age or the gradual changes in climate, they didn't simply decay away as plants do today. The swampy, oxygen-poor conditions where they lived preserved their remains, burying them in layers of sediment. Over millions of years, the weight and heat of burial transformed these ancient forests into something we know very well today: coal. Every time you see a coal seam in a road cut or read about coal deposits, you're looking at the compressed remains of these carboniferous forests. The energy stored in coal is literally fossilized sunlight, the same photosynthetic energy that powered these ancient giants, captured and concentrated over geological time. In a very real sense, much of the energy that powered the Industrial Revolution came from these long-dead forests, these patient trees that grew and stood and fell 300 million years ago. The lignin that allowed these plants to grow so tall, it's still with us today, of course. Every tree you see outside your window contains lignin in its wood. It's what makes wood hard, what allows trees to stand against storms and reach toward the sky. When you knock on wood for luck, you're tapping on lignin. When you smell the earthy scent of autumn leaves, part of that aroma comes from lignin breaking down. Even this very connection between us, if you're reading this on paper, is possible because of lignin, which gives paper its structure and strength. But perhaps the most beautiful thing about this great carboniferous experiment is how it prepared the world for everything that came after. These towering forests didn't just change the landscape, they changed the very chemistry of Earth's atmosphere and oceans. They pulled enormous amounts of carbon dioxide out of the air and locked it away, first in their living tissues and then in the coal deposits they became. They were Earth's first large-scale carbon capture and storage system, operating for millions of years and helping to stabilize the planet's climate. As we settle deeper into our exploration of how plants took over the world, take a moment to appreciate the audacity of this chapter in the story. In just a few tens of millions of years, a blink of an eye in geological time, plants went from tiny green carpets, hugging the edges of ancient shores, to towering forests that covered continents. They learned to stand tall, to reach high, to build the first skyscrapers in the history of life on Earth. And they did it all with nothing but sunlight, water, and an inexhaustible determination to grow. Tomorrow, when you see a tree, any tree, remember that you're looking at the descendant of those pioneering giants, carrying in its cells the same lignin technology, the same vascular highways, the same deep roots that first allowed plants to claim the vertical dimension of our world. The great land rush was just beginning, and the competition for light was about to drive innovation to even more spectacular heights. Now, settle in a little deeper as we continue our journey through deep time. The carboniferous forests we just visited were magnificent, but they were also the beginning of something that would drive plant evolution for hundreds of millions of years to come: competition for light. Picture this ancient world about 300 million years ago. Those early forests had created something that had never existed before on land: shade. For the first time in Earth's history, there were places on the continents where the sun's rays were filtered, blocked, competed for. This changed everything. Imagine being a small plant trying to make a living in the understory of one of those towering carboniferous forests. Above you, giant ferns and scale trees spread their fronds and leaves like green umbrellas, catching the precious sunlight before it could reach you. What would you do? You'd have two choices, really: learn to live in the shadows, or grow tall enough to push through to the light. And so began one of evolution's most spectacular arms races, the race to grow taller, the invention of what we now call the forest canopy. It was like a slow-motion architectural competition, played out over millions of years, with each generation of plants trying to build just a little higher than their neighbors. But growing tall isn't as simple as just stretching upward. It requires solutions to increasingly complex engineering problems. How do you move water from roots to leaves when those leaves are 50, 60, 100 feet above the ground? How do you build a structure that won't buckle under its own weight or snap in the first strong wind? How do you reproduce when your flowers or cones are so high up that ground-dwelling creatures can't reach them? plants solved these challenges with innovations that would make any human engineer proud. They developed more sophisticated vascular systems, with specialized cells that could move water upward against gravity through pure physical chemistry. No pumps required, just the molecular dance of cohesion and transpiration. They engineered wood with different densities and grain patterns, creating natural composites that were both light and strong. They invented buttress roots that spread out like flying buttresses on a Gothic cathedral, providing stability for their towering structures. But perhaps the most elegant solution to the height problem came in the form of a simple but revolutionary invention: the seed. Seeds versus spores. It sounds like a battle between competing technologies, and in many ways, that's exactly what it was. The early land plants we've been following had all been using spores to reproduce, just like their moss and fern ancestors still do today. Spores are remarkable in their own way. Tiny, tough packages that can survive harsh conditions and travel long distances on the wind. But they have one crucial limitation. They need moisture to complete their reproductive cycle. Picture a fern spore landing on the forest floor. It can't immediately grow into a new fern. Instead, it must first grow into a tiny, heart-shaped structure called a gametophyte that produces eggs and sperm. And here's the catch. Those sperm have to swim through a film of water to reach the eggs. In the moist conditions of the Carboniferous swamps, this worked fine. But as climates began to change and drier conditions became more common, plants needed a better solution. Enter the seed, one of evolution's most elegant inventions. Think of seeds as plants learning to pack lunch for their children's journey. Instead of sending their offspring out into the world naked and vulnerable, seed plants learn to surround their embryos with food supplies and protective coatings. A seed is like a tiny spacecraft, equipped with everything a baby plant needs to survive its journey and establish itself in a new location. But seeds were more than just better spores. They represented a fundamental shift in reproductive strategy. Seed plants could reproduce without needing surface water. Their pollen could travel through dry air to fertilize their eggs, and their seeds could wait patiently through droughts and harsh seasons until conditions were right for growth. This gave them a huge advantage in the increasingly varied climates of the late Paleozoic era. The first seed plants, the gymnosperms, appeared around 385 million years ago, but they really came into their own during the Permian period. These were the ancestors of today's conifers, cycads, and ginkgos. They developed cones to protect their developing seeds, and many grew into magnificent trees that could dominate landscapes for thousands of years. But as plants were solving the challenges of height and reproduction, something else was happening in these ancient forests, something that would prove just as important as any technological innovation. Animals were beginning to notice plants, and plants were beginning to notice animals right back. This is where our story takes on the character of the world's first great love story, though it began more like a crime thriller. The earliest interactions between plants and animals were mostly one-sided affairs. Animals eating plants, with plants trying their best to avoid being eaten. Plants developed thorns, toxic chemicals, tough leaves, and bitter tastes. It was an arms race, with each side constantly trying to stay one step ahead of the other. But then something beautiful began to happen. Some plants discovered that instead of just trying to avoid animals, they could actually benefit from them. The first pollination partnerships began to emerge, tentative at first, but gradually becoming more sophisticated and mutually beneficial. Picture an early seed fern producing pollen. Instead of just releasing it into the wind and hoping for the best, imagine that some of this pollen sticks to the bodies of small insects that happen to visit the plant looking for food or shelter. If those insects then visit another plant of the same species, they might accidentally transfer pollen and help with fertilization. Both the plant and the insect benefit. The plant gets more reliable reproduction, and the insect gets food or shelter. This was the beginning of coevolution, the process by which different species influence each other's evolution in an ongoing dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation. It's one of the most beautiful processes in nature, and it was just getting started in these ancient forests. Early beetles began specializing in visiting certain types of plants. Some developed longer mouthparts to reach deeper into plant structures, while plants developed deeper nectaries to ensure their visitors stayed longer and picked up more pollen. Some plants began timing their reproductive cycles to coincide with the life cycles of their animal partners. Animals developed better color vision to find their preferred flowers, while plants evolved more colorful and conspicuous displays. Isn't it wonderful how competition can lead to such beautiful cooperation? What began as an arms race between predator and prey gradually transformed into partnerships that benefited everyone involved. The plants got better reproduction, the animals got reliable food sources, and the ecosystems became more complex and stable as a result. By the end of the Permian period, about 252 million years ago, terrestrial ecosystems had become wonderfully complex. There were towering forests with multiple canopy layers, each hosting its own community of plants and animals. There were plants specialized for life in bright sunlight, and others adapted to deep shade. There were climbing plants that used their neighbors for support, and epiphytic plants that lived perched in the canopy without ever touching the ground. But this beautiful complexity was about to face its greatest test. The end Permian extinction, the most severe extinction event in Earth's history, was approaching. Over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species would disappear. Many of those magnificent Paleozoic forests would vanish forever. Yet from this catastrophe would emerge new opportunities. The survivors of the Great Dying would inherit a world where the old rules no longer applied, where new evolutionary experiments could unfold, where the stage would be set for the next great chapter in plant evolution. So far, our green friends have learned to stand, to reach, and to travel. They've mastered the art of growing tall, of building internal transportation networks, of reproducing without depending on surface water. They've begun the first tentative partnerships with animals, laying the groundwork for relationships that would eventually reshape both the plant and animal kingdoms. But their greatest innovation was still to come, an invention so revolutionary that it would allow them to truly take over the world, diversifying into hundreds of thousands of species and colonizing every possible habitat on Earth. They were about to learn how to be beautiful. Let's drift forward now through our time machine, past the Great Dying at the end of the Permian, through the gradual recovery of the Triassic, and into one of the most remarkable periods in Earth's history, the Cretaceous period, about 130 million years ago. This was when plants learned something that changed not just their own story, but the entire character of life on Earth. They learned to be beautiful. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Weren't plants already beautiful? Those towering Carboniferous forests, the elegant geometry of fern fronds, the stately majesty of early conifers? Of course they were beautiful, in their own quiet, green way. But the beauty they were about to discover was different. It was active, intentional, seductive beauty. It was beauty with a purpose. Settle in comfortably as we explore what paleobotanists call the Cretaceous Revolution, though it might be more accurate to call it the Cretaceous Romance. Because what was really happening during this time was that plants were learning to fall in love, not with each other directly, but with the animals that could help them reproduce. The first flowering plants, the angiosperms, appeared rather suddenly in the fossil record around 130 million years ago. For Charles Darwin, this was such a puzzle that he called it an abominable mystery. How could such complex and sophisticated plants appear so quickly, seemingly out of nowhere? We now know they didn't actually appear overnight. They evolved gradually from earlier seed plants. But once they hit upon the flower formula, they diversified with breathtaking speed. What exactly is a flower, when you really think about it? Strip away the poetry and romance, and a flower is essentially a plant's reproductive organs dressed up in their finest clothes, advertising for partners. But what clothes they learn to wear? Imagine the world before flowers, dominated by the earth tones of conifers and ferns, painted in every shade of green and brown and gold you can imagine, but lacking those brilliant splashes of color that we now take for granted. Then suddenly, as if someone had invented a whole new box of crayons, plants began experimenting with reds and yellows, purples and oranges, blues and pinks. They were creating nature's first advertising campaign. But color was just the beginning. Plants discovered they could shape their petals into landing platforms for insects, or deep tubes that only certain animals could navigate. They learned to produce fragrances, some sweet and alluring, others strange and complex, each one a chemical message designed to attract specific partners. Some flowers began to mimic the appearance or scent of female insects, tricking males into attempting to mate with them and picking up pollen in the process. The partnerships that emerged during this floral revolution were love stories of extraordinary complexity and beauty. Consider the relationship between flowers and bees, which was just beginning to evolve during the Cretaceous. Early bees were likely predators or scavengers, but as flowers became more common, some bees discovered that visiting flowers for nectar and pollen was more reliable than hunting for other insects. But this relationship wasn't one-sided. As bees began to specialize in flower visiting, flowers began to specialize in bee attracting. They evolved colors that bees could see, blues and purples and ultraviolet patterns invisible to our eyes. They shaped their flowers to accommodate bee bodies, creating landing platforms and nectar guides. They timed their blooming to coincide with bee activity patterns. And the bees? They evolved longer tongues to reach deeper into flowers, specialized pollen-collecting structures on their legs, and complex behaviors for communicating the location of good flowers to their sisters. Most remarkably, they developed what we now call flower constancy, the tendency to visit only one type of flower during a single foraging trip, which greatly improves the efficiency of pollination. This coevolutionary dance was happening simultaneously with hundreds of different animal partners. Moths and butterflies were evolving longer tongues to reach into deep tubular flowers. Beetles were developing preferences for particular flower types. Even some early birds and small mammals were beginning to visit flowers for nectar, inadvertently carrying pollen from bloom to bloom. But perhaps the most sophisticated partnerships were developing with flying insects. Flowers learned to time their opening to coincide with insect activity patterns, some opening only at dawn, others only at dusk, still others blooming throughout the day in carefully orchestrated sequences. They developed UV patterns and polarized light reflections that served as runway lights for their aerial visitors. Think about this for a moment. Flowers as nature's first advertising campaign. Each bloom is a carefully crafted message, designed to communicate specific information to potential partners. The color says, "I'm here." The shape says, "This is how you access my rewards." The scent says, "I'm the species you're looking for." The timing of opening says, "I'm ready now." The amount and type of nectar or pollen says, "This is what I'm offering in exchange for your services." And like any good advertising campaign, flowers learned that different messages work for different audiences. Flowers pollinated by bees tend to be blue or purple with sweet scents and moderate amounts of nectar. Flowers pollinated by butterflies are often red or orange, with long tubes and landing platforms. Flowers pollinated by moths are typically white or pale-colored, opening at night with strong, sweet fragrances. Flowers pollinated by beetles are often white or dull-colored, with strong fruity or spicy scents and lots of pollen. But the advertising campaign didn't stop with the flowers themselves. Many plants learned to package their reproductive advertisements in ways that would attract attention from far away. They created massive floral displays. Think of cherry trees covered in thousands of pink blooms, or fields of wildflowers stretching to the horizon. They learned to bloom synchronously, creating spectacular shows that could be seen and smelled from great distances. Some plants even learned to advertise with parts of themselves that weren't directly involved in reproduction. They developed colorful bracts, modified leaves that surround the actual flowers, creating larger, more conspicuous displays. They learned to change colors as their flowers aged, helping pollinators focus on the most fertile blooms. The success of this strategy was extraordinary. Angiosperms, flowering plants, diversified rapidly, eventually becoming the dominant form of plant life on Earth. Today they represent about 90% of all plant species, roughly 300,000 different kinds of flowering plants, each with its own specialized pollination strategy. But the revolution didn't stop with pollination. Flowering plants also invented fruits, structures designed to entice animals to disperse their seeds. If flowers were advertisements for reproduction, fruits were advertisements for travel. Plants learned to package their seeds in sweet, nutritious tissues that animals would eat, carrying the seeds inside their bodies to new locations before depositing them, naturally fertilized, in suitable growing spots. The variety of fruit strategies that evolved is astounding. Some plants created small, numerous fruits that could be eaten by many different animals. Others developed large, energy-rich fruits that would attract specific dispersers. Some fruits ripened in coordinated waves, ensuring that animals would learn to associate certain times and places with reliable food sources. Others ripened individually over extended periods, providing steady resources for their animal partners. Think about this. Every apple you've ever eaten is a love letter between a flower and a bee. The apple tree's ancestor, millions of years ago, evolved flowers specifically designed to attract bees and other pollinators. Those flowers, once pollinated, developed into fruits designed to attract animals, including, eventually, humans, who would carry the seeds to new locations. When you eat an apple, you're participating in a reproductive strategy that has been refined over millions of years of coevolution. The same is true for every fruit in your kitchen, every vegetable in your garden, every grain in your pantry. Each one represents a successful partnership between plants and animals, a reproductive strategy that has been tested and perfected over geological time. We tend to think of ourselves as separate from nature, but in reality, we're deeply embedded in these ancient partnerships. We're pollinators and seed dispersers, just like the bees and birds and mammals that co-evolved with flowering plants millions of years ago. By the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, flowering plants had fundamentally transformed terrestrial ecosystems. They had created the first truly colorful landscapes in Earth's history. They had established complex partnerships with an enormous variety of animals. They had diversified into thousands of species, each adapted to specific environmental conditions and pollination strategies. And they were just getting started. The extinction event that ended the age of dinosaurs would create new opportunities for flowering plants to diversify even further. Many of their animal partners would evolve alongside them, creating the complex, interconnected ecosystems we see today. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of that first flower, blooming in a Cretaceous forest 130 million years ago, its petals catching the morning light, its fragrance drifting on the warm air, attracting the attention of some small insect that had never seen anything quite like it before. That moment of first contact between flower and pollinator was the beginning of partnerships that would reshape the world, creating the beautiful, diverse, interconnected web of life that surrounds us today. Tomorrow, when you see a flower, any flower, remember that you're looking at the result of one of evolution's most successful experiments in cooperation. You're seeing beauty with a purpose, advertising with intent, love letters written in the language of color and scent and form, connecting plants and animals in partnerships that have endured for millions of years. The flowers changed everything, and in doing so, they helped plants complete their conquest of the world. But that conquest was achieved not through domination, but through cooperation, not through force, but through beauty, not through competition alone, but through the creation of partnerships that benefited everyone involved. And perhaps that's the most beautiful lesson of this entire story, that the organisms that truly inherit the earth are not necessarily the strongest or the most aggressive, but the ones that learn to work together, to create relationships that enhance life for all participants, to build communities that are more resilient and more beautiful than any individual could be alone. Let's pause for a moment in our journey through deep time and take a gentle breath together. We've traveled from the first green whispers in ancient oceans to the spectacular flowering revolution of the Cretaceous. But now I want to invite you to step outside with me, not back in time, but right here, right now, and look around at the incredible diversity of plant life that surrounds us today. Wherever you are as you listen to these words, there are plants nearby. Maybe you can see trees through your window, their leaves catching the light. Perhaps there's a houseplant on your windowsill, quietly photosynthesizing in the glow of your reading lamp. Or maybe you're outside right now, surrounded by grass beneath your feet and sky above your head. Each of these plants, every single one, carries within its cells the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of millions of years of adaptation. What strikes me most about plants is not just how they conquered the world, but how they learned to thrive in virtually every environment our planet has to offer. From the driest deserts to the wettest rainforests, from the coldest Arctic tundra to the hottest tropical plains, from the depths of the ocean to the highest mountain peaks, plants have figured out how to call almost every corner of Earth home. Let's begin our exploration of these survival artists with perhaps the most extreme specialists of all, the desert dwellers. Picture yourself standing in the Sonoran Desert on a hot summer afternoon. The sun beats down mercilessly, the air shimmers with heat, and the ground is baked hard as concrete. Most living things are hiding from this blazing intensity, but all around you, plants are not just surviving, they're thriving. Cacti stand like sculptural monuments to ingenuity, their thick stems reaching toward the punishing sky, seemingly oblivious to conditions that would kill most other plants within hours. How do they do it? The story of desert plants is really a story about water, how to find it, how to store it, and most importantly, how not to lose it. Cacti and other desert specialists have become masters of the art of water conservation, developing strategies that would impress any efficiency expert. Consider the barrel cactus, that rotund green giant of the American Southwest. Its shape isn't just for show, it's a masterpiece of engineering. That spherical form provides the maximum possible volume for water storage, while minimizing surface area exposed to the drying sun and wind. It's like a living water tank, designed by millions of years of evolution to capture and hold every precious drop. But shape is just the beginning. The skin of a cactus is covered with a waxy coating so effective that it can reduce water loss by up to 99% compared to a regular leaf. Imagine if you could develop technology that efficient, we'd solve water scarcity around the world. And those spines that make cacti so intimidating? They're actually modified leaves, transformed into protective needles that cast cooling shade over the plant's surface and create tiny pockets of humid air that further reduce water loss. Perhaps most remarkably, many desert plants have completely reimagined the basic process of photosynthesis. Most plants open their leaf pores, their stomata, during the day to take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but this also allows precious water to escape. Desert plants like cacti have learned to open their stomata only at night, when it's cooler and more humid, storing the carbon dioxide in special molecules until the sun rises and photosynthesis can begin. This strategy, called CAM photosynthesis, crassulaceous acid metabolism, if you want to get technical, allows these plants to photosynthesize with minimal water loss. It's like they've learned to hold their breath all day and only breathe at night. The biochemistry is complex, but the principle is beautifully simple. Adapt your schedule to match your environment's opportunities. Now, let's travel to the opposite extreme, to the Arctic tundra, where plants have learned to live in the land of endless winter. Here, the challenge isn't too little water, but too much cold, too little light, and growing seasons so short they seem like brief intermissions between long acts of frozen waiting. Arctic plants have mastered the art of thinking small and staying low. Walk across the tundra in summer, and you'll notice that most plants hug the ground like living carpets. This isn't laziness, it's strategy. Down near the ground, plants can take advantage of the Earth's stored warmth and hide from the fierce Arctic winds that would freeze dry any plant brave or foolish enough to stand tall. Many Arctic plants have developed what we might call botanical insulation, dense coatings of fine hairs that trap warm air close to their leaves, like tiny fur coats made of plant material. Some, like the Arctic poppy, have learned to track the sun with their flowers, following its low arc across the sky to capture every available ray of warming light. But perhaps most remarkably, Arctic plants have mastered the art of patience. Some Arctic willows, trees that in warmer climates might grow tall and straight, remain prostrate on the tundra, growing outward instead of upward, their trunks thick as your wrist but only inches tall. These ancient bonsai masters may be hundreds of years old, adding perhaps one new leaf each year, accumulating growth so slowly that a plant smaller than your coffee table might be older than your country. The cushion plants of high mountains and polar regions have taken this strategy even further. They grow in dense, rounded mounds that can be thousands of years old. Some cushion plants in the Andes are estimated to be over 3,000 years old. They're like living rocks, so compact and slow-growing that they can survive conditions that would challenge even the hardiest mountain climber. Now let's journey to the opposite extreme once again, to the lush complexity of tropical rainforests, where the challenge isn't scarcity, but abundance. Here, plants face a different kind of competition, not the struggle to survive harsh conditions, but the race to claim their share of resources in one of the most crowded ecosystems on Earth. In a rainforest, the vertical dimension becomes everything. Imagine a living skyscraper, with different neighborhoods at different heights, each with its own climate, its own opportunities, its own challenges. Down on the forest floor, it's relatively cool and dim, with only about 2% of the sunlight that falls on the canopy ever reaching the ground. Up in the canopy, 100 feet or more above your head, it's bright and warm, but also dry and windy. Plants have learned to specialize for every floor of this green high-rise. Some have become masters of the shadows, developing enormous leaves to capture every photon of filtered light that drifts down from above. Others have learned to climb, sending up thin stems that use their neighbors as living ladders to reach the bright canopy above. These lianas can grow to extraordinary lengths, some over 3,000 feet long, snaking through the forest like botanical highways connecting distant trees. But perhaps most remarkable are the epiphytes, plants that have learned to live in the air itself, perched on the branches and trunks of trees without ever sending a root down to the soil. These aerial gardens include orchids, bromeliads, ferns, and even small trees, creating hanging gardens of extraordinary diversity. Some epiphytes have developed specialized roots that can absorb moisture directly from the humid air. Others create their own soil by collecting fallen leaves and debris in specialized leaf structures. The strangler figs have developed perhaps the most dramatic strategy of all. They begin life as epiphytes, germinating from seeds dropped by birds high in the forest canopy. But instead of staying small and polite like other epiphytes, they send roots down toward the ground. Roots that gradually thicken and multiply until they form a living cage around their host tree. Eventually, the host tree dies and decomposes, leaving the fig standing as a hollow but living tower, having used its former host as a temporary scaffold for its climb to the light. And then there are the plants that decided to go back to where it all began, the water. These aquatic returners represent one of the most fascinating chapters in plant evolution, the story of species that conquered the land, mastered terrestrial life, and then chose to return to their ancestral home in lakes, rivers, and oceans. Water lilies are perhaps the most familiar of these aquatic returners, with their broad leaves floating serenely on pond surfaces and their elegant flowers rising just above the water. But beneath that peaceful surface lies sophisticated adaptation machinery. Their leaves have specialized air chambers that provide buoyancy, waterproof upper surfaces that shed water like a duck's back, and stomata only on the upper surface. After all, why have breathing pores underwater where they can't function? Seagrasses have gone even further, returning not just to fresh water but to the salty sea itself. These are true flowering plants, not algae, despite their name, that have readapted to marine life so completely that they can photosynthesize underwater, reproduce underwater, and even pollinate underwater. Watching seagrass pollen drift through the water like green snow is a reminder that evolution never stops experimenting, never stops finding new solutions to old problems. Perhaps the most extreme aquatic adapters are the carnivorous plants of bog environments, places where the boundary between land and water blurs into something entirely unique. Venus flytraps, pitcher plants, and sundews have learned to supplement their diet by catching and digesting insects, essentially becoming part plant, part predator. They've turned the tables on the usual relationship between plants and animals, proving that in the right circumstances, even the most fundamental rules of ecology can be rewritten. What strikes me most about all these survival artists is how they demonstrate that adaptation isn't about becoming something else, it's about becoming more yourself. A cactus isn't a failed tree, it's a plant that has discovered how to be perfectly, magnificently adapted to desert life. An Arctic willow isn't a stunted forest giant, it's a master of survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Each of these specialized plants represents millions of years of refinement, of fine-tuning the basic plant blueprint to match specific environmental challenges. The same fundamental toolkit, photosynthesis, vascular systems, reproduction, growth, has been modified, adjusted, and optimized to create solutions we're still learning to understand and appreciate. The gentle science behind all this adaptation is both simple and profound. Every plant you see is the current endpoint of an unbroken chain of successful reproduction stretching back billions of years. Every leaf shape, every root structure, every flowering time represents a solution that worked well enough to be passed on to the next generation. It's natural selection in action, but operating so slowly and over such vast scales of time that we rarely get to witness it directly. Instead, we see the results. This magnificent diversity of form and function, this spectacular array of survival strategies, this living library of solutions to environmental challenges. Each plant is like a book written in the language of adaptation, telling the story of how life responds to the challenges and opportunities of a constantly changing world. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of these survival artists. Cacti storing water in desert heat, Arctic flowers tracking the midnight sun, strangler figs embracing their hosts in slow-motion forest dramas, water lilies floating serenely on mirror-still ponds. Each one a testament to life's extraordinary creativity. Each one a reminder that there are as many ways to live successfully on this planet as there are environments to live in. And perhaps you'll wake tomorrow with new eyes for the plants around you, seeing not just green decorations on the landscape, but master strategists, survival artists, living embodiments of millions of years of evolutionary problem solving. Every plant has a story to tell about adaptation, about finding unique ways to thrive in the particular patch of earth it calls home. Now, let's shift our attention from the visible world of leaves and flowers to a realm that exists mostly beyond our everyday awareness, the hidden universe beneath our feet. As you settle in more comfortably, I want you to imagine that you could shrink down to the size of a grain of sand and journey into the soil beneath the nearest tree. What you would discover there would revolutionize your understanding of how plants actually live in the world. Far from being solitary individuals competing for resources, you would find yourself in the middle of one of nature's most sophisticated communication networks, a biological internet that has been operating for hundreds of millions of years. This is the world of mycorrhizal networks, and it's a world that challenges almost everything we thought we knew about how forests and other plant communities really work. The word mycorrhiza comes from Greek roots meaning fungus, root, and that's exactly what they are. Intimate partnerships between plant roots and fungal threads that form what scientists have started calling the wood wide web. But this isn't just a clever play on words. These underground networks really do function like an internet, carrying information, resources, and chemical messages between plants across vast distances. Picture the root system of a single tree, already an impressive network spreading outward and downward through the soil. Now imagine that each of those roots is connected to thread-like fungal networks that extend much further than the roots themselves, connecting not just to the soil but to the roots of other trees, other plants, sometimes hundreds of feet away. These fungal threads, called hyphae, are incredibly thin, finer than spider silk, but they can extend for miles through the forest soil. The fungi and the plants have struck up one of nature's most successful partnerships. The plants provide the fungi with sugars and other carbon compounds produced through photosynthesis, essentially paying them with food. In return, the fungi provide the plants with water and mineral nutrients they've extracted from the soil, along with something even more valuable: connection. Through these mycorrhizal networks, trees can share resources with their neighbors. A large, well-established tree in full sunlight can send excess sugars through the fungal network to smaller trees struggling in the shade. In autumn, before evergreen trees shed their needles, they can transfer nutrients to deciduous trees that are storing up resources for winter. Parent trees can recognize and preferentially support their own offspring, sending them extra resources to help them get established. But the network carries more than just nutrients and water. It also carries information. When a tree is attacked by insects, it can send chemical warning signals through the mycorrhizal network to alert its neighbors, allowing them to begin producing defensive compounds before the insects reach them. If part of a forest is experiencing drought stress, that information can travel through the network, helping other areas prepare. Trees can even send distress signals when they're dying, triggering nearby trees to increase their own defensive preparations. Dr. Suzanne Simard, the forest ecologist who first demonstrated many of these phenomena, has shown that mother trees, the largest, most connected individuals in a forest, can support dozens of younger trees through these networks. When a mother tree is dying, it often dumps its remaining resources into the network, essentially willing its accumulated wealth to the next generation. This discovery has profound implications for how we understand forest ecosystems. Instead of seeing forests as collections of individual trees competing for resources, we now understand them as superorganisms. integrated communities where the success of individual members depends on the health of the whole network. But the underground internet goes beyond just mycorrhizal networks. Plants have also learned to communicate through their own chemical languages, sending messages through the soil and air that can be detected and interpreted by their neighbors. When a plant's roots are damaged, they release specific chemical compounds into the soil. These compounds can be detected by nearby plants, which may respond by altering their own growth patterns or increasing their production of defensive chemicals. Some plants can even recognize their own siblings through these chemical signatures, growing more cooperatively with relatives than with strangers. Above ground, plants engage in equally sophisticated chemical conversations. When a plant is being eaten by herbivorous insects, it often releases volatile organic compounds into the air, essentially screaming, "Help!" in a chemical language that other plants can understand. Neighboring plants that detect these airborne distress signals may respond by increasing their production of compounds that make them less tasty or more toxic to the same herbivores. Some plants have learned to eavesdrop on the chemical conversations of their neighbors, gaining valuable information about environmental conditions without having to experience those conditions directly. A plant growing in optimal conditions might detect stress chemicals from a neighbor and begin preparing its own stress responses, getting a head start on adapting to changing conditions. Recent discoveries have pushed our understanding of plant communication even further into the realm of what we might call plant intelligence. Researchers have discovered that plants can learn and remember, that they can anticipate regular environmental changes, that they can make decisions about resource allocation that seem to require something like planning and forethought. Plants can distinguish between the sound of running water and other similar sounds, growing their roots preferentially toward actual water sources. They can recognize the footsteps of different animals, responding more strongly to the approach of herbivores than to harmless passers-by. Some plants can even learn to associate neutral stimuli with dangerous ones, showing a form of associative learning that was once thought to be exclusive to animals with nervous systems. The Venus flytrap has perhaps the most sophisticated information processing system discovered in plants so far. Its trap mechanism requires multiple trigger hairs to be touched in sequence within a certain time window before it will snap shut. This prevents the plant from wasting energy on false alarms caused by raindrops or wind-blown debris. But even more remarkably, the plant can count. It can distinguish between 1 touch, 2 touches, and 3 touches, with different responses triggered by each number. These discoveries are forcing us to reconsider our basic assumptions about what it means to be intelligent, what it means to communicate, what it means to live in community. Plants may not have brains or nervous systems as we understand them, but they clearly process information, make decisions, and engage in complex social behaviors that benefit not just themselves, but their entire communities. The philosophical implications are staggering. If plants can communicate, learn, and remember, if they can form mutually supportive communities that persist for centuries, if they can make decisions and solve problems, then what does that say about the nature of intelligence itself? What does it say about our relationship with the living world around us? Right now, beneath your feet, there's a conversation happening that's older than human language. Trees are sharing resources with their neighbors. Fungi are carrying chemical messages across forest floors. Plants are warning each other about dangers and opportunities. Root systems are negotiating access to water and nutrients in chemical languages we're only beginning to decode. This underground internet operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, maintaining the health and stability of ecosystems around the world. It's a commons in the truest sense, a shared resource that benefits everyone who participates in it, but only works when individuals contribute as well as take. The mycorrhizal networks that connect forest communities can persist for centuries, outliving individual trees and maintaining the memory of the forest ecosystem across generations. When old trees die and new ones germinate, they plug into this existing network, gaining not just access to resources, but to the accumulated experience of the forest community. In many ways, these networks represent the ultimate expression of cooperation in the natural world. They show us that the old evolutionary narrative of red in tooth and claw competition is incomplete. Yes, competition exists in nature, but so does collaboration, communication, and mutual aid on scales we're only beginning to appreciate. The implications for human society are profound. These plant communities show us that resilience and sustainability emerge not from individual strength, but from network connectivity, not from hoarding resources, but from sharing them, not from competition, but from collaboration. As we face our own global challenges, climate change, resource scarcity, social inequality, perhaps we can learn something from these ancient underground networks. Perhaps the solutions we need already exist beneath our feet, in the form of biological systems that have been refining the arts of communication, cooperation, and sustainable resource management for hundreds of millions of years. When you walk through a forest tomorrow, remember that you're not just walking among individual trees. You're walking through a living network, a community where each member's well-being depends on the health of the whole, where information and resources flow freely for the benefit of all, where the wisdom of centuries is stored not in libraries, but in the living connections between roots and fungi and soil. The wood wide web is always on, always working, always weaving the forest together into something greater than the sum of its parts. And in its quiet, patient operation, we can see a model for how life can thrive through cooperation rather than competition, through sharing rather than hoarding, through connection rather than isolation. As we near the end of our journey through the remarkable world of plant adaptation, I want to invite you to step back and consider perhaps the most profound role that plants play in our world, not just as inhabitants of Earth, but as active architects of the very conditions that make complex life possible. Plants don't just live on Earth, you see. In the most literal sense, they make Earth livable. Let's begin with something so fundamental that we rarely think about it consciously: the air we breathe. Right now, as you listen to these words, your lungs are filling with oxygen that was created by plants. Not just any plants, and not just recently, but by the accumulated photosynthetic work of green organisms stretching back over billions of years. Take a deep breath with me. Feel that oxygen entering your lungs, binding to the hemoglobin in your blood, traveling to every cell in your body where it will help power the chemical reactions that keep you alive. That oxygen is a gift from the plant kingdom, a byproduct of photosynthesis that has been accumulating in our atmosphere for over 2 billion years. But to truly appreciate this gift, we need to remember that oxygen wasn't always abundant in Earth's atmosphere. In fact, for the first 2 billion years of our planet's history, oxygen was scarce and often toxic to early life forms. The transformation of Earth into an oxygen-rich world was perhaps the greatest environmental engineering project in the history of life, and it was carried out entirely by plants and their photosynthetic ancestors. Every day, the plants around you are continuing this ancient work. A single large tree can produce enough oxygen to support 2 human beings for an entire day. The Amazon rainforest alone produces about 20% of the world's oxygen, which is why it's often called the lungs of the Earth. But oxygen production is happening everywhere. There are photosynthetic organisms in every forest and grassland, in every algae-filled pond, in the phytoplankton that bloom in vast invisible gardens across the oceans. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Scientists estimate that plants and other photosynthetic organisms produce about 330 billion tons of oxygen every year. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the weight of all the land animals on Earth, produced fresh every single year, just as a byproduct of plants making their own food from sunlight and carbon dioxide. But oxygen production is just one part of plants' role as climate engineers. They're also Earth's most important carbon managers, constantly pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it in their tissues, in soil, and in long-term geological deposits. Think of trees as Earth's memory banks, storing not just carbon, but the history of atmospheric conditions in their annual growth rings. When a tree is growing, it's actively removing carbon dioxide from the air and incorporating that carbon into its wood, leaves, and roots. A single mature tree can store over a ton of carbon during its lifetime, carbon that would otherwise be contributing to atmospheric warming. But the carbon storage capacity of plants goes far beyond just the living trees we can see. Forest soils, enriched by centuries of falling leaves and decomposing plant matter, store even more carbon than the living vegetation above ground. Grassland soils, built by the extensive root systems of prairie plants, can store carbon for centuries or even millennia. Some of the coal, oil, and natural gas we use today is carbon that was originally captured from the atmosphere by ancient plants millions of years ago. Those carboniferous forests we visited earlier in our journey. They pulled so much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stored it in their tissues that they significantly altered Earth's climate, helping to stabilize atmospheric composition and global temperatures. Modern plants continue this work on a scale that dwarfs any human technology. Scientists estimate that terrestrial plants absorb about 120 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year, roughly 16 times more than all human fossil fuel emissions. Of course, much of this carbon is released back to the atmosphere when plants decay or are eaten, but a significant portion remains stored in long-lived wood and soil organic matter. But plants' role as climate engineers goes even deeper than carbon and oxygen management. They're also weather makers, actively creating and modifying the local and regional climates where they live. Consider how forests create their own rain. Through the process of transpiration, trees release water vapor from their leaves into the atmosphere. A single large tree can release hundreds of gallons of water into the air every day. When you multiply this by all the trees in a forest, the amount of water being pumped into the atmosphere is enormous. This water vapor rises into the atmosphere where it condenses into clouds and eventually falls as precipitation. Much of the rain that falls on inland areas originally evaporated from forests hundreds or even thousands of miles away. The Amazon rainforest, for example, generates about half of its own rainfall through this process. Water that evaporates from trees in the eastern Amazon falls as rain in the western Amazon, which then evaporates again and falls further west, creating a river of moisture flowing through the atmosphere above the forest canopy. Remove the forest, and you don't just lose the trees, you lose the rain they generate, often turning the entire region drier and less hospitable to life. This is one reason why deforestation can have impacts far beyond the immediate area where trees are cut down. Plants also serve as Earth's thermostat, helping to regulate temperatures both locally and globally. Forests tend to be cooler than surrounding areas because trees provide shade and because the process of transpiration has a cooling effect, much like how sweating cools your body. Urban trees can reduce local temperatures by 2 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, making cities more livable during hot summer months. On a global scale, plants help moderate climate through their influence on Earth's reflectivity. Dark forests absorb more solar energy than lighter-colored grasslands or bare ground, affecting regional and global temperature patterns. Changes in vegetation can alter local weather patterns, wind flows, and even the formation of weather systems. The seasonal cycles of plant growth and dormancy in the northern hemisphere actually cause detectable fluctuations in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Every spring, as plants leaf out and begin photosynthesizing actively, they pull so much CO2 out of the atmosphere that global atmospheric levels drop measurably. Every autumn, as plants go dormant and decomposition increases, atmospheric CO2 levels rise again. Earth literally breathes with the rhythm of plant growth. But perhaps most remarkably, plants have been engineering Earth's climate for so long that they've created feedback systems that help maintain planetary stability. When atmospheric CO2 levels rise, plants generally grow faster and pull more carbon out of the atmosphere. When temperatures get too high, increased plant growth and cloud formation can provide cooling effects. When conditions become too dry, plants' water management systems can help maintain local humidity. These feedback systems aren't perfect, and they can be overwhelmed by rapid changes, but they represent billions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. Plants haven't just adapted to Earth's climate, they've actively participated in creating and maintaining the climate conditions that support complex life. The relationship between plants and climate is so intimate that some scientists describe Earth's vegetation and atmosphere as a single, integrated system. Changes in one component inevitably affect the others, creating cascading effects that can influence weather patterns, ecosystem stability, and the habitability of entire regions. As we face the challenges of human-caused climate change, understanding plants' role as climate engineers becomes more crucial than ever. Many of our most promising solutions to climate change involve working with plants rather than against them, protecting existing forests, restoring degraded ecosystems, developing more sustainable agricultural practices, and designing cities that incorporate vegetation as a fundamental component of urban infrastructure. Plants have been solving climate challenges for billions of years. They've survived ice ages and warm periods, asteroid impacts and volcanic catastrophes, always adapting and always continuing their work of making Earth livable for the incredible diversity of life we see today. The gentle environmental message in all of this isn't one of guilt or despair, but of wonder and possibility. We're not separate from the natural systems that maintain our planet's habitability, we're part of them. Every garden we plant, every tree we protect, every natural area we restore is a contribution to the ancient work of climate engineering that plants have been doing since life began. When you see a forest, you're not just looking at a collection of trees. You're looking at a climate control system, an oxygen factory, a carbon storage facility, a weather generator, and a temperature regulator, all rolled into one. You're looking at technology that's more sophisticated than anything humans have ever built, refined by billions of years of research and development, and offered to us freely as part of our planet's life support system. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, take a moment to appreciate the quiet work happening all around you. Plants are photosynthesizing in the darkness, storing carbon in their tissues, cycling water through their leaves, maintaining the atmospheric composition that allows you to breathe easily. They're doing the same work they've done every night for billions of years, keeping our planet livable, one leaf at a time. And perhaps tomorrow, you'll look at the plants around you with new appreciation, not just as beautiful decorations or sources of food and materials, but as active partners in maintaining the conditions that make life on Earth possible. They're the original environmental engineers, the masters of sustainable technology, the gardeners of our global climate. In their quiet, patient work, we can find both humility and hope. Humility in recognizing how much we depend on systems we didn't create and often don't fully understand, and hope in knowing that these systems have proven remarkably resilient and adaptable over geological time. The plants that took over the world didn't do so through conquest or domination. They did it by becoming indispensable, by making themselves essential to the very functioning of Earth's life support systems. And in doing so, they created a world where countless other forms of life, including us, could flourish. Let's take a gentle pause in our journey through deep time and fast forward to a moment that, in the grand scale of Earth's history, happened just yesterday. About 12,000 years ago, a mere blink of an eye compared to the hundreds of millions of years we've been traveling through, something extraordinary happened that would change both the plant kingdom and the trajectory of life on Earth. Forever, humans learned to farm. Now, settle in comfortably as we explore this pivotal chapter because, you see, we are not separate from this story of how plants took over the world. We are part of it, intimately and inextricably woven into the same evolutionary narrative that began with those first green whispers in ancient oceans. Picture, if you will, our ancestors around 12,000 years ago. They were already remarkable beings. They had developed language, art, complex social structures, and sophisticated hunting and gathering techniques. They understood the rhythms of the seasons, knew which plants were good to eat and when to find them, could read the landscape like a book written in stone and leaf and flowing water. But then, in a development that would prove as revolutionary as anything in the history of life on Earth, some of these hunter-gatherers began to notice something interesting about certain wild grasses and other plants. If you saved some of the seeds instead of eating them all, if you planted them in places where they might grow well, if you tended them and protected them from competitors and predators, you could have more food with less wandering. This seems simple enough, but what was really happening was the beginning of one of evolution's most remarkable partnerships, a collaboration between humans and plants that would transform both species in ways neither could have achieved alone. Agriculture wasn't invented just once. It emerged independently in at least 7 different regions around the world, almost as if the idea was somehow inevitable once human intelligence and plant biology reached a certain threshold of complexity. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, people began cultivating wheat and barley. In China, they domesticated rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans, and squash. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa. In New Guinea, bananas and taro. In eastern North America, sunflowers and squash. In Africa, yams and African rice. Each of these agricultural revolutions was really a story of mutual domestication. Humans changing plants, but plants changing humans just as profoundly. Consider wheat, one of humanity's oldest and most important partners. Wild wheat? the ancestor of the grain that might be in your pantry right now, had evolved to scatter its seeds when ripe, ensuring wide dispersal. But some individual wheat plants had a genetic mutation that made their seeds cling to the stalk longer. In the wild, this would have been a disadvantage, making it harder for the seeds to spread. But for early farmers, these non-shattering varieties were perfect. Much easier to harvest because the grain didn't fall to the ground before they could collect it. So humans began selecting and planting these mutant wheats, generation after generation, until virtually all domestic wheat had lost the ability to disperse its own seeds effectively. The wheat had become dependent on humans for reproduction, but humans had become equally dependent on wheat for survival. It was a marriage of mutual benefit and mutual dependence that continues to this day. But the changes went much deeper than just seed dispersal. Under human selection, wheat grains became larger, more nutritious, and more uniform. The plants became shorter and sturdier, better able to support heavy seed heads without toppling over. They became synchronous in their ripening, making harvest more efficient. In essence, they became living tools, shaped by human needs and desires. And humans? Humans changed just as dramatically. The shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture required new skills, new social organizations, new ways of understanding time and planning for the future. Farming meant staying in one place, which meant permanent settlements, which meant the accumulation of possessions and the development of craft specializations. Agriculture also meant surplus. For the first time in human history, a few people could produce enough food to feed many people. This freed others to become specialists, toolmakers, traders, priests, warriors, administrators. The complexity we call civilization became possible only because plants like wheat, rice, and corn were productive enough to support large populations of non-farmers. The story of how grasses built empires is one of the most remarkable chapters in both human and plant history. Take rice, for instance. This humble grain, domesticated in the river valleys of China about 9,000 years ago, would go on to support some of the largest and most enduring civilizations in human history. The intensive irrigation systems required for rice cultivation encouraged the development of complex social hierarchies and governmental structures. The reliability of rice harvests allowed Asian societies to support dense populations and invest in art, philosophy, literature, and technological innovation. Corn, or maize, as it's known in most of the world, tells an even more dramatic story of coevolution. Wild teosinte, the ancestor of corn, produces tiny seeds nothing like the large kernels we know today. The transformation of teosinte into corn required such extensive genetic changes that for decades, botanists couldn't even identify corn's wild ancestor. Indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica didn't just domesticate corn. They essentially created it through thousands of years of careful selection and breeding. And corn returned the favor by enabling the rise of complex civilizations throughout the Americas. The Maya, Aztec, and Inca empires were all built on foundations of corn agriculture, supported by sophisticated agricultural techniques that could feed millions of people. When European colonizers arrived in the Americas, they found agricultural systems that were in many ways more productive and sustainable than those in Europe. The Anthropocene, our current geological age, defined by human impact on Earth systems, really began with agriculture. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species was actively directing the evolution of other species on a massive scale. Humans began reshaping landscapes to suit the needs of their plant partners, clearing forests for farmland, building irrigation systems, terracing hillsides, and creating vast monocultures of selected crops. But this transformation was reciprocal. Plants were reshaping human societies just as profoundly. The caloric density and storability of grain crops allowed human populations to grow exponentially. The need to tend crops year-round led to the development of permanent settlements, which led to the accumulation of material culture, which led to trade networks, which led to the development of writing systems to keep track of surpluses and transactions. Consider this remarkable fact. Before agriculture, the entire human population of Earth was probably fewer than 10 million people. Today, largely thanks to our partnership with domesticated plants, we're approaching 8 billion. That's an 800-fold increase, made possible by the productivity of plants that have been shaped by thousands of years of human selection. But the story of human-plant partnership isn't just about the major crop species. Humans have formed relationships with thousands of plant species, each one representing a unique co-evolutionary experiment. We've domesticated fruits like apples and oranges, transforming them from small, often bitter wild varieties into the sweet, large fruits we enjoy today. We've selected vegetables like carrots and cabbage, breeding them into forms that would be unrecognizable to their wild ancestors. We've also formed partnerships with plants for purposes beyond food. Cotton, flax, and hemp provided fibers for clothing and rope. Trees were selected and managed for construction materials. Medicinal plants were cultivated and improved. Ornamental plants were bred for beauty. In each case, humans shaped plant evolution, while plants shaped human culture. The pace of this co-evolution has accelerated dramatically in recent centuries. The Columbian Exchange, the transfer of plants, animals, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds following European colonization of the Americas, represents one of the most rapid and extensive redistributions of species in Earth's history. Crops like potatoes, tomatoes, and corn spread throughout the world, while wheat, rice, and livestock were introduced to the Americas. This exchange had profound effects on both human history and plant evolution. The introduction of potatoes to Europe, for instance, led to population booms and also to catastrophic famines when potato diseases struck. The spread of wheat and other Old World crops enabled European colonization of temperate regions worldwide. Meanwhile, American crops like corn and potatoes became staples in Africa and Asia, supporting population growth and cultural change on multiple continents. Today, we're in the midst of what might be called a second agricultural revolution, driven by advances in genetics, biotechnology, and our understanding of plant biology. We can now read and edit plant genomes directly, accelerating the process of crop improvement that once took centuries. We're developing crops that can tolerate drought, resist diseases, and even produce pharmaceuticals. But this power to reshape plant evolution comes with unprecedented responsibility. Our agricultural and industrial activities are now affecting plant communities worldwide, from local ecosystems to global climate patterns. We're inadvertently selecting for certain traits in wild plants, those that can tolerate pollution, fragmented habitats, and climate change, while pushing others toward extinction. The Anthropocene isn't just about human impact on the environment, it's about the fundamental interconnectedness of human and natural systems. Every major human settlement, every agricultural landscape, every managed forest represents a collaboration between human intelligence and plant biology. Our cities are ecosystems where ornamental plants, weedy species, and cultivated crops create novel plant communities that never existed before humans. Climate change, driven largely by the burning of fossil fuels that are themselves the remains of ancient plants, is now reshaping plant communities worldwide. Species are migrating toward the poles and up mountainsides, following the climate conditions they're adapted to. Plant ranges are shifting, flowering times are changing, and the timing of ecological interactions is being disrupted. But even as we grapple with these challenges, new forms of human-plant partnership are emerging. Urban agriculture is bringing food production back into cities. Restoration ecology is using our understanding of plant biology to repair damaged ecosystems. Green infrastructure is incorporating plants into urban design to provide ecosystem services like air purification, stormwater management, and climate regulation. Indigenous peoples around the world, whose ancestors developed most of our major crop species, are being recognized as repositories of invaluable knowledge about sustainable human-plant relationships. Their traditional ecological knowledge, developed over thousands of years of intimate coevolution with local plant communities, offers insights that may be crucial for addressing contemporary environmental challenges. As we reflect on this human chapter in the story of how plants took over the world, what strikes me most is how it demonstrates that we are not separate from nature. We are part of it. Our evolution as a species has been intimately intertwined with plant evolution for thousands of years. The plants in our gardens, our farms, and our forests are not just resources we use, they are partners we've co-evolved with, species we've shaped and that have shaped us in return. Every meal you eat connects you to this ancient partnership. The bread on your table represents thousands of years of collaboration between humans and wheat. The rice in your bowl carries the genetic legacy of countless generations of farmers who selected and saved the best seeds. The fruit in your kitchen embodies the patient work of plant breeders who understood that improving crops meant improving human life. We are living in a moment when the consequences of this partnership are more visible than ever before. The challenges we face, climate change, biodiversity loss, food security, sustainable development, are all fundamentally about the relationship between human societies and the plant kingdom. But they're also opportunities to deepen and improve these relationships, to learn from the wisdom embedded in traditional agricultural systems, and to develop new forms of partnership that can sustain both human civilization and the natural world. Tomorrow, when you tend a garden, buy groceries, or simply notice the plants around you, remember that you're participating in one of evolution's greatest experiments in cooperation. You're part of a story that began when the first farmers saved seeds from their harvest. A story that continues every time we choose to plant rather than pave, to restore rather than destroy, to partner with plants rather than simply exploit them. We are not separate from this story of how plants took over the world. We are part of it. And how it continues to unfold depends, in large part, on the choices we make about how to live in relationship with the green world that sustains us. As we continue our exploration of the human chapter in plant evolution, I want to invite you to look around you with fresh eyes, at the technology surrounding you, the medicines in your cabinet, the very air you're breathing. What you'll discover is that plants continue to be our teachers, our partners, and our inspiration in ways that might surprise you. We live in an age of unprecedented technological advancement, yet some of our most promising innovations come from studying the solutions that plants have been developing for hundreds of millions of years. This field, called biomimicry, represents a humble recognition that nature has already solved many of the engineering challenges we're just beginning to tackle. Consider the simple leaf, something so common we rarely give it a second thought. But engineers studying leaf structure have discovered design principles that are revolutionizing everything from solar panels to water collection systems. The microscopic structure of leaf surfaces, with their precisely arranged cells and specialized coatings, has inspired the development of self-cleaning materials that repel water and dirt, just like a lotus leaf. The lotus leaf surface is covered with tiny bumps and a waxy coating that causes water to bead up and roll off, carrying dirt and debris with it. This discovery has led to the development of self-cleaning windows, stain-resistant fabrics, and paint that stays clean without washing. It's a simple principle, texture and chemistry working together, but one that took millions of years of evolution to perfect. Plant leaves have also inspired advances in solar energy technology. The way leaves capture and convert sunlight is still more efficient than our best solar panels, and researchers are working to understand and copy the molecular mechanisms of photosynthesis. Some experimental solar cells now use modified chlorophyll or other plant pigments to capture sunlight, essentially turning artificial leaves into electricity generators. The structure of plant stems and trunks has inspired architects and engineers working on everything from skyscrapers to wind turbines. The bamboo stem, hollow yet incredibly strong, has influenced the design of lightweight building materials. The spiral growth patterns found in many plant stems have inspired more efficient wind turbine blade designs that can capture energy from turbulent airflows. Even plant roots are teaching us new approaches to engineering problems. The way roots spread through soil, finding water and nutrients while anchoring the plant, has inspired designs for foundation systems that can better withstand earthquakes and other ground disturbances. Some experimental buildings now use root-like foundation networks that distribute loads more evenly and adapt to changing soil conditions. But perhaps nowhere is the intersection of ancient plant wisdom and modern innovation more profound than in medicine. Walk into any pharmacy, and you're entering what is essentially a temple to plant chemistry. Despite all our advances in synthetic chemistry and biotechnology, about 40% of all pharmaceuticals still come directly from natural sources, mostly plants, or are synthetic versions of compounds first discovered in plants. The story of aspirin illustrates this beautifully. For centuries, indigenous peoples around the world knew that willow bark could relieve pain and reduce fever. In the 19th century, chemists isolated the active compound, salicin, and learned to synthesize a modified version that was easier on the stomach. Today's aspirin is still essentially willow bark medicine, refined and standardized, but based on the same plant chemistry that people discovered thousands of years ago. This pattern repeats throughout the history of medicine. Digitalis, used to treat heart conditions, comes from foxglove. Morphine and codeine come from opoppies. Quinine, which has saved countless lives by treating malaria, comes from the bark of cinchona trees in South America. Taxol, one of our most effective cancer drugs, was originally isolated from the Pacific yew tree. But plants offer us more than just individual medicines. They offer us entire pharmacies. Traditional healers around the world have developed sophisticated understanding of how different plants can be combined to create more effective treatments with fewer side effects. This traditional knowledge, developed over thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation, represents a vast library of potential medical discoveries. Modern researchers are working to understand and validate these traditional uses, but they're also discovering that plants continue to evolve new chemical defenses against diseases and pests. Every forest, every grassland, every wetland is essentially a research laboratory where millions of years of evolutionary experimentation has produced compounds we're only beginning to understand. The challenge is that we're losing this natural pharmacy faster than we can study it. Every ecosystem that's destroyed, every species that goes extinct, represents the loss of millions of years of evolutionary research and development. Some scientists estimate that we're losing potential medicines faster than we're discovering them, as habitats disappear and traditional knowledge is forgotten. But there's hope in this story too. Around the world, people are working to preserve both the biological diversity that represents our future pharmacy and the traditional knowledge that can guide us to the most promising discoveries. Ethnobotanists work with indigenous communities to document traditional plant uses. Conservation biologists work to protect the ecosystems where these plants evolve. Biotechnologists work to understand how plant chemistry might be modified or synthesized to create new medicines. Plants are also offering us solutions to some of our most pressing environmental challenges. As we grapple with climate change, we're rediscovering that plants are some of our most powerful allies in removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it safely for long periods. Reforestation and afforestation, planting trees where forests once grew and where they never grew before, represent some of the most cost-effective approaches to carbon sequestration. A single tree can absorb and store tons of carbon dioxide over its lifetime, while also providing habitat for wildlife, preventing soil erosion, and moderating local climate. But trees aren't the only plants that can help address climate change. Grasslands, with their extensive root systems, can store enormous amounts of carbon in soil. Wetland plants can filter pollutants from water while also sequestering carbon. Even agricultural crops, if managed properly, can help build soil carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the most innovative climate solutions involve working with plants in new ways. Algae farming, for instance, can produce biofuels while also capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Seaweed cultivation can help acidified oceans while providing food and materials. Constructed wetlands can treat wastewater while also providing carbon storage and habitat. Perhaps most remarkably, plants are reclaiming cities around the world, creating what some people call urban jungles. This isn't just about parks and street trees, though those are important too. It's about the recognition that incorporating plants into urban design can address multiple challenges simultaneously. Green roofs and living walls don't just look beautiful. They provide insulation that reduces energy use for heating and cooling, manage stormwater runoff, filter air pollutants, and create habitat for urban wildlife. Urban forests can reduce the heat island effect that makes cities hotter than surrounding areas, while also improving air quality and providing psychological benefits for city dwellers. Vertical farms and urban agriculture are bringing food production into cities, reducing the energy needed to transport food while also providing fresh produce for urban communities. These systems often use less water and land than traditional agriculture while producing higher yields per square foot. But perhaps most inspiring are the plants that reclaim urban spaces on their own, without human planning or intervention. In cities around the world, pioneer species are colonizing abandoned lots, growing in sidewalk cracks, and creating novel ecosystems in the most unlikely places. These urban wildlands remind us that plants don't just survive in human-dominated landscapes, they can thrive there, often creating more biodiversity than existed before urbanization. The abandoned buildings of Detroit have become green oases, where prairies and forests are reclaiming industrial sites. The ruins of ancient cities around the world are being slowly enveloped by forests that preserve archaeological sites while creating habitat. Even the most polluted urban environments often support surprising diversity of plant life, as species adapt to conditions that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. These urban plant communities represent evolution in action, rapid adaptation to novel environments created by human activity. Some urban plants are developing tolerance to air pollution, soil contamination, and other urban stresses. Others are changing their flowering times, growth patterns, or reproductive strategies to match urban conditions. In many ways, these urban plant pioneers are showing us possible futures, demonstrating how plant and human communities might coexist in a world where the majority of people live in cities. They're proving that plants don't just survive in human-dominated landscapes. They can make those landscapes more livable, more beautiful, and more sustainable. Every garden planted in a city, every green roof installed on a building, every tree planted along a street is an act of faith in the future. It's a recognition that human communities are healthiest when they include other forms of life, that cities can be ecosystems too, and that the ancient partnership between humans and plants continues to evolve in new and promising directions. The traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, developed over thousands of years of intimate relationship with local plant communities, is increasingly recognized as essential for addressing contemporary environmental challenges. These knowledge systems often embody principles of sustainability, reciprocity, and ecological understanding that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Indigenous agricultural systems, for instance, often maintain much higher levels of biodiversity than modern industrial agriculture, while also being more resilient to climate variation and pest outbreaks. Traditional forest management practices often create more diverse and stable ecosystems than either industrial forestry or strict preservation. But integrating traditional knowledge with modern science requires more than just studying indigenous practices. It requires respecting indigenous rights, supporting indigenous communities, and recognizing that this knowledge belongs to the people who developed it over generations of careful observation and experimentation. As we look toward the future, the partnership between humans and plants seems likely to deepen and diversify. Advances in biotechnology are allowing us to understand plant biology at molecular levels, potentially leading to crops that are more nutritious, more resilient, and more sustainable. Urban design is increasingly incorporating plants as essential infrastructure rather than just decoration. Climate change is driving innovation in how we use plants for carbon sequestration, ecosystem restoration, and adaptation to changing conditions. But perhaps most importantly, we're rediscovering that our well-being, physical, psychological, and spiritual, is intimately connected to the health of plant communities. Studies show that people who live near forests, parks, and other green spaces are healthier, happier, and more resilient to stress. Even brief exposure to natural environments can lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, and improve cognitive function. This suggests that the future of human civilization depends not just on technological innovation, but on maintaining and strengthening our relationships with the living world. Every garden is an act of faith in the future. Every restored ecosystem is an investment in resilience. Every effort to preserve traditional ecological knowledge is a gift to future generations. The plants that taught our ancestors how to live on Earth continue to have much to teach us. Their lessons about sustainability, resilience, cooperation, and adaptation are more relevant than ever as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. Now, as we near the end of our journey through the remarkable story of how plants took over the world, I want to invite you to consider something that might change how you see the world around you forever. We've traveled together through hundreds of millions of years, from the first green whispers in ancient oceans to the flowering revolutions that painted the world in color. But there's one more chapter to this story, perhaps the most important one, that's largely invisible to our everyday experience. The truth is, when we ask how plants took over the world, we're asking the wrong question. Plants didn't just take over the world, they are the world, in ways both profound and beautiful that we're only beginning to understand. Let's start with something you can't see, but that surrounds you right now: the microscopic plant life that powers the entire ocean ecosystem. As you listen to these words, perhaps imagining yourself by the sea, picture the water stretching to the horizon. It looks empty, doesn't it? Just blue water meeting blue sky. But that apparent emptiness is actually teeming with life so abundant that it dwarfs all terrestrial ecosystems combined. The ocean's invisible gardens are composed primarily of phytoplankton, microscopic algae, and other photosynthetic organisms that drift in the surface waters like living dust motes. These tiny beings are so small that millions of them could fit in a single teaspoon of seawater, yet collectively they perform one of the most important functions on our planet. Phytoplankton produce more than half of the oxygen we breathe, more than all the forests, grasslands, and crops on land combined. Every second breath you take comes from these microscopic marine plants. They also form the base of virtually all ocean food webs, converting sunlight and nutrients into the organic matter that feeds everything from tiny zooplankton to great whales. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Scientists estimate that phytoplankton have a total mass roughly equivalent to all terrestrial plants combined, despite being individually microscopic. During peak blooms, a single liter of seawater might contain millions of these tiny plants, turning vast areas of ocean into underwater meadows, visible even from space. These blooms follow seasonal patterns, much like terrestrial vegetation. In spring, as daylight increases and nutrients become available, phytoplankton populations explode in what marine biologists call the spring bloom. From satellite images, you can watch waves of productivity sweep across ocean basins, creating temporary underwater prairies that support entire ecosystems before gradually fading as nutrients are depleted. But the ocean's plant life extends far beyond just phytoplankton. In shallow coastal waters, vast underwater forests of kelp and other seaweeds create some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. Giant kelp forests off the coast of California can grow up to 2 feet per day, creating underwater cathedrals that rival any terrestrial forest in their complexity and beauty. These marine forests provide habitat for thousands of species while also sequestering enormous amounts of carbon. Some scientists estimate that marine vegetation stores carbon even more effectively than terrestrial forests, since much of the organic matter sinks to the deep ocean where it can remain stored for centuries or millennia. But the invisible plant takeover extends far beyond the oceans. On land, the most abundant plants are often the ones we notice least: the mosses, lichens, and other cryptobiotic organisms that form living crusts covering vast areas of apparently barren ground. In desert regions around the world, what looks like empty soil is often covered with biological soil crusts composed of cyanobacteria, algae, mosses, and lichens. These cryptobiotic communities, crypto meaning hidden and biotic meaning living, can cover 70% or more of the ground surface in arid lands. Yet they're so inconspicuous that most people walk right over them without realizing they're stepping on living ecosystems. These biological soil crusts perform crucial ecological functions. They prevent soil erosion, fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and provide habitat for specialized communities of plants and animals. They can photosynthesize when moisture is available, contributing to ecosystem productivity even in the harshest environments. Some of these crusts are incredibly ancient. Scientists have found cryptobiotic communities that may be thousands of years old, quietly holding desert soils together through centuries of drought and disturbance. Even in forests and grasslands, much of the plant biomass is invisible to casual observation. The root systems and fungal networks we explored earlier represent enormous quantities of living tissue that we rarely see. Scientists estimate that in many ecosystems, there's more plant biomass below ground than above ground. Entire cities of roots and fungal partners working quietly in the darkness. And then there are the lichens, those partnership organisms that are part fungus, part algae, and entirely remarkable. Lichens grow in places where neither fungi nor algae could survive alone. On bare rock faces, in polar regions, in polluted urban environments. They're pioneers in the truest sense, often being the first living things to colonize new or disturbed habitats. Some lichens are incredibly long-lived. The map lichens that grow on granite in Arctic regions may be thousands of years old, growing so slowly that their expansion can be measured in millimeters per century. These ancient beings have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations while quietly converting rock into soil, one microscopic bit at a time. The sheer diversity of plant life becomes staggering when you start to count. Scientists have formally described about 400,000 plant species so far, but they estimate that there may be 500,000 or more species in total. This means that roughly 1 in every 5 living species on Earth is a plant. In some ecosystems, particularly tropical rainforests, plant diversity reaches almost incomprehensible levels. Single hectares of Amazon rainforest may contain more tree species than exist in all of North America. But even these numbers only tell part of the story. Plants have colonized virtually every habitat on Earth where liquid water exists, and many where it doesn't. They grow in hot springs where temperatures approach boiling, in Arctic regions where the ground is frozen year-round, in caves where sunlight never penetrates, in the saltiest lakes and the most acidic soils. Some plants have even learned to live without soil entirely. Epiphytes, air plants, perch on other plants and structures, gathering all their needs from air and rain. Spanish moss draped over southern trees, orchids growing on tropical branches, and tillandsia surviving on telephone wires all demonstrate plants' remarkable ability to find ways to live in the most unlikely places. The takeover extends into human environments in ways that might surprise you. Your house, wherever you are, is likely home to dozens of plant species, most of which you never intended to invite in. Mold and mildew growing in damp areas are technically plants. The algae that might form green films on the north side of your building are photosynthetic pioneers. Even the dust in your home likely contains spores, pollen, and microscopic plant fragments from around the world. Cities, despite being designed by and for humans, often support remarkable plant diversity. Urban environments create novel habitats, rooftops, abandoned lots, roadside edges, storm drains that are colonized by plant species from around the world. Many cities support both cosmopolitan weeds that have spread globally and rare native species that persist in urban refugia. The global movement of people and goods has accelerated plant migration to unprecedented levels. Species that evolved on separate continents are now mixing in cities around the world, creating novel plant communities that never existed before human transportation networks. Some of these introduced species become problematic invasives, but others simply add to the richness and complexity of urban ecosystems. Perhaps most remarkably, plants have even colonized the most artificial human environments. The International Space Station hosts experimental plants that help us understand how life might survive in space. Some species have evolved to tolerate extremely polluted environments, growing in soils contaminated with heavy metals or other toxins. Others have adapted to urban microclimates, developing tolerance to air pollution, salt from road de-icing, and the altered temperature and moisture regimes of cities. The numbers become almost surreal when you consider plant biomass, the total weight of plant material on Earth. Scientists estimate that plants represent about 80% of all biomass on our planet. This means that roughly 4 out of every 5 pounds of living matter on Earth is plant tissue. Humans, by comparison, represent less than 0.01% of total biomass. Put another way, if you could somehow weigh all the living things on Earth, the vast majority of that weight would be plants. All the animals, from blue whales to bacteria, combined represent only about 20% of Earth's biomass. The rest is leaves and stems, roots and seeds, wood and bark, algae and moss. This biological dominance becomes even more impressive when you consider that plants achieve it while remaining largely sessile, rooted in place, unable to move around to find food or escape danger. They've conquered the world not through mobility or aggression, but through the elegant simplicity of being able to make food from sunlight. And they've done it while making the world more beautiful. This might be the most remarkable aspect of the plant takeover, that in conquering the world, plants have created landscapes of stunning beauty and complexity. The same evolutionary processes that allowed plants to colonize every possible habitat have also produced the incredible diversity of forms, colors, textures, and patterns that make the natural world so visually compelling. Think about it. Every landscape you find beautiful, from mountain meadows to ocean shores, from autumn forests to spring gardens, owes its beauty primarily to plants. The colors that catch your eye, the patterns that please your aesthetic sense, the textures that invite your touch. Most of these come from the plant kingdom. Even the animals we find beautiful are often beautiful because of their relationships with plants. The bright colors of many birds and butterflies come from plant pigments in their diet. The elaborate antlers of deer and elk are grown with energy from plant foods. The complex songs of many birds are partially about defending territories rich in plant resources. So when we ask how plants took over the world, maybe the real question is, how did they make it so beautiful? How did the same evolutionary processes that enabled survival and reproduction also produce such aesthetic richness? How did practical adaptations, leaf shapes that maximize photosynthesis, flower colors that attract pollinators, fruit designs that entice dispersers, also create the visual symphony that surrounds us? Perhaps beauty itself is a kind of evolutionary strategy. Perhaps the aesthetic appeal of natural landscapes reflects deep patterns of organization and complexity that our brains are wired to appreciate. Perhaps we find plants beautiful because we evolved alongside them, our aesthetic sense shaped by millions of years of dependence on healthy plant communities. Or perhaps beauty is simply an inevitable byproduct of the creative process of evolution itself. The same forces that optimize survival and reproduction also generating the endless variety and complexity that we experience as beautiful. As you settle into sleep tonight, take a moment to appreciate the invisible plant world that surrounds you. The oxygen in your lungs was produced by microscopic algae drifting in distant oceans. The wooden frame of your house grew as a tree reached toward the sunday. The cotton in your bedsheets was once fluffy white seeds designed to carry new plants on the wind. The herbs in your kitchen cabinet represent chemical innovations refined over millions of years of plant evolution. You are surrounded by plants, supported by plants, breathing the exhalations of plants, living in structures built from plants, eating the products of plant photosynthesis. You are not separate from the plant world. You are embedded within it, part of the same interconnected web of life that stretches from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks. The plants haven't just taken over the world. They've made it into a place where beauty and complexity emerge naturally from the simple process of turning sunlight into life. And in doing so, they've created a world where other forms of life, including us, can not only survive but flourish, finding wonder and meaning in the endless creativity of the living world. Tomorrow, when you step outside, remember that you're entering a world that is fundamentally green, fundamentally alive, fundamentally shaped by the patient work of plants converting starlight into the substance of life itself. The takeover is complete, but it's a takeover we can celebrate, because it's a takeover that made possible everything we love about living on this beautiful, green planet we call home. As we settle into the final movements of our journey together, I want you to imagine with me what a forest might look like 100 years from now. Close your eyes gently and picture yourself walking along a familiar forest path, but one that exists in the year 2125. The trees around you are both familiar and strange, recognizable as descendants of the forests we know today, yet adapted in ways that tell the story of a world transformed. Some of the changes might be subtle at first. Perhaps you notice that the growing season seems to extend deeper into what was once winter, with some trees holding their leaves longer than you remember from old photographs. Maybe the species composition has shifted. Trees that once grew hundreds of miles to the south, now thriving in what was once a cooler climate, while the species that used to dominate have migrated north to find the temperature ranges they prefer. This is climate change made visible in wood and leaf, and it's happening right now, all around us. As plants respond to our rapidly changing world with the same ingenuity and adaptability that has carried them through hundreds of millions of years of Earth's transformations, plants are remarkably resilient, but they're also incredibly sensitive indicators of environmental change. Trees, with their long lifespans and deep roots, integrate climate conditions over years and decades. Their growth rings tell stories of wet years and dry years, cold snaps and heat waves, written in the language of cellular structure and preserved in wood that may outlast the civilizations that witness their growth. Right now, plants around the world are already adapting to climate change in ways both subtle and dramatic. Spring is arriving earlier in many places, triggering earlier flowering times that ripple through entire ecosystems. Some plants are shifting their ranges, literally migrating, one generation at a time, toward cooler climates at higher latitudes or elevations. But plants can't move as quickly as climate is changing, and this is where the story becomes both challenging and inspiring. Many species are facing what biologists call range shifts. The geographic areas where they can survive are moving faster than they can migrate. For some plants, this creates a race against time, with survival depending on their ability to adapt to new conditions or reach more suitable habitats. Yet plants have faced similar challenges before and found remarkable solutions. During the ice ages, entire forests migrated across continents as glaciers advanced and retreated. Seeds traveled on wind and water, in the guts of migrating animals, and through the patient work of gradual dispersal over many generations. The forests we see today are the descendants of those great migrations, proof that plant communities can survive even dramatic climate changes. Modern plants are drawing on this deep evolutionary experience, but they're also benefiting from an unprecedented partner: human conservation efforts. Around the world, people are working to help plants adapt to climate change through assisted migration programs, seed banking, habitat restoration, and the protection of climate corridors that allow species to move more easily across landscapes. The stories emerging from these conservation efforts are filled with both heartbreak and hope. There's the story of the Franklinia tree, extinct in the wild since 1803, but preserved in cultivation and now being reintroduced to protected habitats. There's the drama of the California condor pine, hanging on in a few isolated groves, while researchers work frantically to understand its needs and expand its range before climate change makes its current habitat unsuitable. But there are success stories too. The American chestnut, once called the redwood of the East before blight nearly drove it to extinction, is making a comeback through a combination of breeding programs, genetic research, and careful habitat restoration. Scientists have developed blight-resistant varieties that maintain the species' ecological role while surviving the disease that devastated the original populations. Perhaps most inspiring are the community-based conservation efforts happening in biodiversity hotspots around the world. In Madagascar, local communities are protecting endemic plants while developing sustainable livelihoods based on ecotourism and sustainable harvesting. In the Amazon, indigenous groups are using traditional knowledge combined with modern technology to monitor and protect forest ecosystems. These efforts remind us that conservation is not just about protecting individual species, it's about maintaining the complex relationships that make ecosystems resilient. When we protect a forest, we're not just saving trees, we're preserving the mycorrhizal networks that connect them, the soil communities that support them, the pollinators that reproduce with them, and the countless other species that depend on them. The future forest of 2125 might also include species we're only beginning to discover today. Despite centuries of botanical exploration, scientists are still describing thousands of new plant species every year. Many of these discoveries are happening in biodiversity hotspots like tropical rainforests, but others are being found in our own backyards, as molecular techniques reveal that what we thought were single species are actually complexes of closely related but distinct species. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of plant diversity and evolution, but it also highlights how much we still don't know about our green companions. Recent research has revealed that plants are far more sophisticated than we once imagined. They can learn and remember, communicate with each other, and make complex decisions about resource allocation and growth patterns. The field of plant cognition is exploding with new discoveries that challenge our fundamental assumptions about intelligence and consciousness. Plants can anticipate regular environmental changes, learn from experience, and even exhibit behaviors that look remarkably like decision-making. They can recognize their relatives and cooperate more readily with kin than with strangers. They can remember past experiences and use that information to make better choices in the future. These discoveries are reshaping our understanding of what it means to be intelligent, and they're also changing how we think about our relationship with the plant world. If plants are capable of learning and memory, if they communicate and cooperate, if they make decisions and solve problems, then our interactions with them take on new ethical dimensions. But perhaps the most exciting frontier for plant research is also the most literally far-reaching: space agriculture. As humanity takes its first tentative steps toward becoming a spacefaring species, plants are emerging as essential partners in this next great journey. The International Space Station has hosted hundreds of plant experiments, teaching us how plants grow in microgravity and how they might be adapted for life in space. Astronauts have successfully grown lettuce, radishes, tomatoes, and other crops in space, proving that it's possible to create closed-loop life support systems where plants produce oxygen, purify water, and provide fresh food for human crews. These space gardens are more than just technological achievements. They're also profound symbols of the interconnectedness between human and plant life. In the confined environment of a spacecraft, the relationship between humans and plants becomes immediate and visible in ways that it often isn't on Earth. The oxygen you breathe comes directly from the plants growing beside you. The water you drink has been purified by plant transpiration and photosynthesis. Your food literally grows from the waste products of your own metabolism, processed through plant biology. Future Mars colonies may depend entirely on plant partners for survival, with vast greenhouse complexes providing not just food and oxygen but also psychological benefits for colonists living in harsh alien environments. The plants that travel to Mars with human explorers will carry with them the genetic heritage of billions of years of Earth evolution, making them living ambassadors of our home planet. But even as we look towards space, the most important plant partnerships of the future may be right here on Earth. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and the need for sustainable food systems are driving innovation in plant science at an unprecedented pace. Scientists are developing crops that can tolerate drought, flood, salt, and extreme temperatures. They're working to increase the nutritional content of staple foods and reduce the environmental impact of agriculture. Some of these innovations involve traditional breeding techniques, but others use cutting-edge genetic tools to introduce specific traits or enhance natural plant processes. Scientists are working to develop crops that can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere like legumes do, potentially reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers. They're enhancing photosynthesis efficiency in crops like rice and wheat, potentially increasing yields while reducing water and land requirements. Urban agriculture is also evolving rapidly, with vertical farms, rooftop gardens, and living walls bringing food production into cities, while also providing ecosystem services like air purification and stormwater management. These urban plant systems often use less water and land than traditional agriculture, while producing higher yields and requiring fewer pesticides. Perhaps most profoundly, we're beginning to understand that the future of plants and humans is not separate stories, but one story, with two voices. Our fates are intertwined, not just through our dependence on plants for food, oxygen, and materials, but through our shared evolutionary history and our common future on this planet. The plants of the future forest will be shaped by human choices, just as human societies will be shaped by plant responses to environmental change. The conservation decisions we make today will determine which species survive the climate challenges ahead. The agricultural innovations we develop will influence how plant breeding evolves. The urban environments we create will select for new plant communities adapted to city life. But plants will also continue to surprise us, as they always have, with solutions we never imagined and adaptations we couldn't have predicted. Evolution never stops experimenting, never stops finding new ways for life to thrive in changing conditions. The plants of 2125 may include species that have evolved entirely new strategies for dealing with elevated CO2 levels, changed precipitation patterns, or novel urban environments. As we look toward this uncertain but hopeful future, what strikes me most is how the fundamental relationship between humans and plants remains constant even as its specific expressions continue to evolve. We are still the species that learned to partner with plants to create agriculture and civilization. Plants are still the organisms that learn to turn sunlight into the substance of life itself. The future forest may look different from the forests of today, but it will still be a place where human and plant stories intersect, where the ancient partnerships that have sustained both our species continue to evolve and deepen. In walking through that future forest, we'll still be walking through our own history, our own evolutionary heritage, our own ongoing relationship with the green world that makes our existence possible. And perhaps that's the most hopeful thing of all, that no matter what changes the future brings, we'll still be part of the same ancient story that began with those first green whispers in primordial oceans, still participants in the same grand experiment in cooperation between human intelligence and plant ingenuity that has been unfolding for thousands of years. Now, as our journey through deep time draws to a gentle close, I want to bring you back to this moment, to this place where you're listening to these words, and invite you to see the world around you with the eyes of wonder we've been cultivating together. Wherever you are right now, whether you're curled up in bed, sitting by a window, walking through a park, or resting in your favorite chair, take a moment to look around you. Really look. What plants can you see from where you are? Maybe there's a houseplant on a nearby windowsill, its leaves catching the light as it quietly performs the ancient alchemy of photosynthesis. Perhaps you can see trees through a window, their branches reaching toward the sky in patterns that speak of millions of years of optimization for light capture and structural stability. Or maybe you're outside right now, surrounded by grass beneath your feet and leaves overhead, immersed in the green world that has been the subject of our long exploration together. Each plant you can see carries within its cells the entire story we've been traveling through. That houseplant is a descendant of the first brave pioneers that crawled out of ancient oceans onto hostile shores. Its ability to photosynthesize connects it directly to those first cyanobacteria that learned to eat sunlight billions of years ago. Its flowers, if it has them, represent the culmination of the evolutionary romance that began in Cretaceous forests when plants first learned to be beautiful. Every leaf you see is a masterpiece of engineering, refined over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Those leaves are simultaneously solar panels capturing energy from our nearest star, chemical factories converting carbon dioxide into organic compounds, and air purifiers removing pollutants while releasing life-giving oxygen. The tree outside your window, any tree, is one of Earth's greatest success stories. Its roots may connect to a vast underground network, sharing resources and information with nearby trees. Its trunk holds years of climate memory, while its branches shelter birds, insects, and mosses. And every day, it quietly makes your world more livable. That tree produces oxygen, absorbs carbon dioxide, filters air, cools the surrounding environment, and supports entire ecosystems. With every breath you take, you're directly connected to it and to all the photosynthetic life on Earth. The oxygen in your lungs might have come from that very tree or from distant oceanic plankton. Every breath is a gift from the plant world. Plants sustain us in deeper ways too. All food originates from plants or from creatures that depend on them. The energy in your body began as sunlight, captured by leaves and converted into nourishment. The materials around you, wood, paper, cotton, even some medicines, trace their origins to plants. Beyond survival, plants offer beauty and wonder. The colors, patterns, and scents of the plant world connect us to something larger, an ancient, ongoing story of life powered by sunlight. To see a tree fully is to remember, we are not apart from nature, but part of it. Our brains are wired to find nature beautiful and for good reason. Even brief exposure to plant life can reduce stress, boost mood, sharpen focus, and promote healing. From faster recovery in hospital patients to improved learning in children, the presence of greenery supports human well-being. This attraction may come from our deep evolutionary relationship with plants. For millions of years, healthy ecosystems meant food, water, and survival. Our brains learned to value the visual signals of vibrant plant life. But perhaps the connection goes even deeper. On some level, we recognize plants as kin, fellow participants in Earth's story. We depend on them for air, food, and shelter, and they, in turn, shape the conditions for life itself. When we pause to truly see a plant, we reconnect with the living systems that sustain us. This awareness can change us. It turns everyday objects like wood, food, or even breath into reminders of ancient partnerships. It transforms nature from background scenery into living community. And it invites us to protect the plant world, not just for its sake, but for our own. Tomorrow, when you pass a tree, pause. See its quiet brilliance. Feel your shared story. And let that moment fill you with gratitude, wonder, and belonging.